Okay, and I am a little bit I don't know, different when it comes to my teaching approach. I like to use picture language a lot, so I'll kind of draw you a little picture of what I'm talking about here. If I have a blank piece of paper that I can write on, maybe. Okay, there we go. So this is me. And if I say the word cat, I want you guys to imagine like a cat, but with ears and nose and a body, and I want you to picture like what color he is and all that fun stuff. So, as I am, oh, can you even see that? No. Okay. So yeah, as I'm talking, I just want you guys to use your imaginations. So I have a background in motion pictures. My bachelor's degree was in motion picture production and theory. So I like to think of my eyes as a camera and my brain as like a hard drive where I'm capturing a movie inside my head. So if I say like, what does that make you picture? That's kind of what I'm talking about. Like what picture do you have in your mind? So without further ado, I'm going to switch back to the slides here and try to be organized. I'm a little disorganized today. Can everybody hear me okay? I know this, the mask, it's kind of like, it's sending the sound back to my ears, so I sound really loud to myself. But can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay, good. So, GDP and the business cycle. So what do you guys picture for GDP? Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
A money sign.
A money sign. Okay, good. That is a great picture for gross domestic product. So it's kind of a money sign for like an entire country's economy, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. And what is economics? Economics is the study of how people satisfy their wants and needs when there are limited and scarce resources. So, microeconomics, it's a branch of economics dealing with decisions and behaviors of individuals. So picture like individual households making economic decisions, based on their house payments and their food payments, electric bills, stuff like that, as well as like individual businesses. Like, does anybody's parents own a company or anything, or parents, grandparents, friends have a family business or anything? No. Okay. Well, when I was a kid, my stepfather had a custom home building business. So every year we would pretty much have to move to a different model home. So that was kind of his economic thinking. We build a house, we would live in it for a while, and then it was kind of like a model home also. We had to, I had to clean my room a lot when I was a kid, just to make sure that the house looked nice every day so they could show the house and sell it. Macroeconomics, so that is the branch of economics dealing with the total or the aggregate economy. So, so it's the study of the structure and performance of national economies, the policies that governments use to try to affect economic performance. So, do you guys have your packets that you're able to follow along with? Okay. Does everybody have their filled out already? Okay. Does anybody need me to go slowly so you can get it filled in? No, everybody already has it filled in? Okay, awesome. So, how do we measure the performance of national economy? So there's three things. Does anybody know what those three things are? The economic indicators? Yes?
GDP, inflation, unemployment rate.
Unemployment rate and inflation. Yeah, perfect. Very good. And so these are the statistics that we use in order to understand the health. So when you think of these economic indicators, try and think of like the country as being healthy. So so if it's gross, not the gross like total that we're talking about here, but if it's a nasty economy, it's a bad economy, right? So we want a good economy. So try and think of that as like You know, if it's gross, if it's nasty, you know, it's the health is bad in the economy. All right, so gross domestic product. There's 4 key parts to this.
Mr. Village?
Yes,
I'm sorry to bother you.
it's okay.
I'm just realizing with the class this fall, there's nowhere I can sit and stay socially distanced. So
Okay.
I'm just gonna use the video as my,
Okay.
does that seem okay?
Yeah,
with
yeah,
you?
absolutely.
Okay. All right. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, if there was an empty seat, it'd be different, but.
Yeah, this COVID stuff
I'll
makes
just
it all
see at the end
different.
of the file.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the audio is able to pick me up with, you know, this mask on. So, it's the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country's borders during a 12-month period. So the gross domestic product answers the question, how productive were we as a country? So the country as a whole. That's kind of what we're looking at here. So it's also like a geographic measure. So it's, you know, like the geographic United States. So we were looking at the continental United States. So, and then, you know, like China would have their own gross domestic product economists that are looking at their own. So we can measure what our country looks like, and they can measure what their country looks like. Okay, so like, there's the Toyota. Toyota is made in southern Indiana. It's Japanese owned, but since they're made here in Indiana, those would count toward our gross domestic product, not Japan's gross domestic product. Did anybody happen to look at like their clothing tag when they were getting dressed this morning? Like anybody notice where their clothes were made? No? Okay. So when I was getting dressed this morning, I kind of looked at the tag on this shirt. It said it's made in Cambodia. So it's a J. Crew shirt. So J. Crew, it's an American company, but the shirt was actually made in Cambodia. Does anybody know where Cambodia is? No. So it neighbors Vietnam. So, and they were kind of involved in the Vietnam War. The United States bombed Cambodia along with Vietnam in the Vietnam War. And the Vietnamese were getting supplies from Cambodia. So the U.S. didn't like that, so they started bombing both countries. But that's what allowed us to be able to wear shirts, you know, that were made in Cambodia today. So it is Veterans Day, so I am a veteran, so I do, you know, think of that stuff a lot. So, you know, these economic terms that we're talking about, you know, it does rely on, you know, the military and wars in order to make peace treaties so we can have, you know, economic products today. Yes?
So you're saying that that shirt would be for Cambodia's GDP?
Yeah, so this shirt would go
Even
toward
though it's sold
Cambodia's
here.
GDP. So even though it's a J. Crew, which is an American company, because it was made in Cambodia, it would go towards Cambodia's gross domestic product. Whereas, you know, like Toyota, they make cars here in Indiana. It's like, I can't remember which town it is. It's Princeton, I think, Princeton, Indiana. It's like south of Terre Haute. And they make Toyota cars and vehicles there, but they don't ship them overseas because they're huge, right? So they make them here in America, sell them here in America, stuff like that. That creates American jobs. So like the workers are getting paid, and you know they're going out and spending money within our economy. So that all that income that the workers at Toyota in Princeton, Indiana, all that money that they earn is part of our gross domestic product, and all the money that they spend on food and groceries and clothes, stuff like that, all that goes toward our gross domestic product. Great question. All right. So GDP is a primary indicator used to understand the health of a country's economy. So, gross domestic product, it's how much money's worth of stuff we made this year. So in the United States, our gross domestic product in 2019 was $21,427,100,000,000. And the United States has, like, by far the largest economy in the world. So we kind of drive the global economy. So this means that 21 trillion, 21 trillion point $427 trillion worth of goods and services were made within the U.S. borders in 2019. And that would be like all final sales and all money earned within that year. So even though like the guy who works at the Toyota plant, he's earning money from Toyota, which is a Japanese country, he's still buying stuff here in America. So that would all count toward like our gross domestic product. Right, and gross domestic product. So this is kind of the calculation that we use to figure out gross domestic product. Does anybody know what the C stands for? The C. Yes.
Consumer spending.
Yeah, consumer spending. Very good. And the I. Anybody know what the I is? I. Yeah, right here. Investment. Yeah, very good. That's exactly what it is. And G. What does the G stand for? Yeah.
Government spending?
Government spending, very good. What about the X minus M? What does X minus M stand for? Yeah,
Net exports?
yeah, net exports. So like X is exports, M is imports. So we subtract the imports from the exports. Yeah, great job. And then sometimes the GDP is also called like the Y or the output in the equation. Okay. So we kind of talked about these already. These are the letters in the equation that we just went over. Consumer spending, it's 68% of gross domestic product. So it's spending by households on goods and services. That doesn't include new houses. Investment, it's 17.5% of the gross domestic product. And new homes would be in this category, would be in like the investment category, not really the consumer spending category. Which is the purchase of goods that will be used in the future to produce more goods and services. So like capital goods, equipment, and intellectual property is that IPP, and structures and inventories. So structures would be like factories, that like the Toyota factory in Princeton, Indiana. That would be like a physical investment. And then also like newly constructed homes would be an investment also. And then inventories, like I'm sure Toyota has like all kinds of different parts, right? That they're gonna go into the cars. So they probably have like a stock room that they have to go to in order to get, an exhaust manifold to, have the robots or whatever to, put that car together. Government spending, so this would be like construction of new roads, like infrastructure. Whenever they build a new roundabout, that would be considered in government spending. That's 17.5% of the gross domestic product, and that would also include like what the military spends on like new jets and planes and B-1 bombers and F-16s and F-18s, F-22s, stuff like that. That's all going to be included in the government spending, that 17.5%. So only spending on goods and services, not transfer payments. So transfer payments are like Social Security, unemployment benefits, so anything that's going to be like transferred. Basically, they're just like moving it from one bank account to another bank account. So those transfer funds would not be included. They're kind of just like shifting money around there. Net export, so that one's a negative. So negative 3% of the gross domestic product. So if you were to add the 68 plus 17.5 plus 17.5, that's 103%. So that negative kind of brings it back down to 100%. And that's the X minus N, exports minus imports. And that's foreign purchases of domestic goods. So it's the exports minus the domestic purchases of foreign goods or imports. So you subtract things that people in the U.S. bought from overseas. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes.
Are cars more consumer spending or investment
Spending.
spending?
Spending, yeah. As soon as you drive a car off a lot, it's like worth half of what you just paid for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times people buy cars thinking that they can afford the payments of like $500 or $600 a month, but really they're going to struggle to make those $500 or $600 monthly payments, and then the car's not worth nearly what they just paid for it. So you got to think if you really can't afford those payments, because you're not investing in anything when you're buying a car. Unless it's like a historical one, and you're going to take care of it and not put very many miles on it, that would be like an investment car. Those old ones, but we wouldn't count it in gross domestic product. That would be like a second-hand sale, right? Okay. So, positive trade is a surplus. Negative trade is a deficit. The United States hasn't had a surplus since like the 1970s. So like in our modern economy, we don't usually have surpluses, we have deficits. So trade deficits. So what is not included? So intermediate goods, so that would be like if you were to go to the store and buy like some cereal. So I like Chex cereal. Chex is gluten-free, so it's not made from wheat. I think it's usually made from corn or rice. Corn or rice are the different Chex cereals. So the intermediate goods would be like the stuff that's going into that Chex cereal. So if I spend like $5 on a box of Chex, that $5 isn't going directly to Kroger or the store I bought it from. Some of that $5 is going to go to like whoever like breaks down, like I think Pillsbury. I think they mill like the corn or the rice to make it into like a powder, like a flour. So part of that $5 is going to go to them to mill that. And they're getting the corn and the rice from a farmer, right? So part of that $5 you just spent is going to the farmer as well. And the farmer, they need like a tractor. They need tractors also. So part of that's going to the tractor company. Part of that tractor, it needs steel and factories and stuff. So like part of that $5 I spent on my box of cereal, it's going to that intermediate goods. It's going to all those intermediaries that are kind of in between the final product. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. All right. So secondhand sales. Do you guys have a good picture of that? We just kind of talked about it. So, with that would be like used cars. So they're already counted in the gross domestic product. So when that car was new, that's when it was counted. Like, if you bought like a 1970 Mustang or something like that, that would have been in like 1970s gross domestic product. All right. Non-market transactions. Does anybody do chores around the house that they don't get paid for? Yeah, all right, good. So those would be non-market transactions. Like if mom and dad tells you to clean your room and you don't get an allowance for it, that would be non-market transactions. Underground economies, that's like drug cartels, illegal weapons, human trafficking, black markets, stuff like that. And then also you could probably include those like Social Security payments I mentioned earlier, like the government transactions, like unemployment benefits that are being transferred to people. Those would probably be included in that as well. So what are the two different kinds of GDP? Does anybody remember the two different kinds that we look at? We've got real versus nominal. And real would be based on the information above. It's one or both of the following statements must be true. So if it's not goods and services that are being sold at higher prices, than last year, then the economy's producing more goods and services than last year. So in 2018, there was the 20 trillion versus 2019, which is the 21 trillion. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that everything was sold at higher prices, but we might be just like producing more goods and services. So just our economy was more productive, is kind of what it's saying, not that everything was being sold at higher prices. So nominal GDP and real GDP. So nominal, that is like if you take the $100 bill. So if that $100 bill, if you look at it from the nominal way says that that $100 bill has always been worth $100. Like in 1850 or 1902 to today, it's always worth $100. 100 years from now, it'll still be worth $100. So that's the nominal view. So, whereas the real view, that would be like, what is the real view? Does anybody have a good picture for real versus nominal when we're talking about a $100 bill? So can you buy as much stuff today with $100 as you could in 1902? No, good, you can't. That's very good. So real would be like taking into account inflation and stuff like that. So I think recently I was looking at, it was the last pandemic, the Spanish flu in 1918. In San Francisco, they made it a law that you had to wear a mask. And if you didn't wear a mask, you were fined $5. And I was curious what $5 in 1918 was compared to $5 today. So the $5 in 1918, to us today, it was more like a $90 fine. So they were basically fining people like almost $100 if they weren't wearing a mask. Or I think they had to spend like 5 days in jail if they didn't have the $5 to pay the fine. So, kind of interesting. All right, so nominal GDP and current dollar GDP. So the production of goods and services or gross domestic value at the current prices. So that's not adjusted for inflation. So that would be like the $100 is worth, not always going to be worth $100 in that nominal one. Whereas the real one, they adjust for inflation. So like prices of goods go up, people make more money, and they have like two people working like mom and dad work instead of just dad working, so they can increase the price on cars and stuff like that. Okay, so what does constant prices mean? So it's when you choose a base or a constant year, or the real GDP uses 2012. So 2012 is like the base year. I am going to switch here real quick. Just wanted to give you guys an idea of what the current GDP looks like. Alright, so I pulled this up this morning off of the Bureau of Economic Analysis website, and the real percentage change, you can kind of see it from 2016 till now, and you can kind of see how it's gone down a little bit, and up a little bit, and down, and up, and then way down. So what happened in Q2 of this year? Oh, anybody know? Yeah, the pandemic. So the pandemic, we took a huge hit, right? But it looks like it's back swinging up again. So it had a huge loss and then a huge gain compared to all these other tiny little ups and downs over the past few years. And this one kind of gives you a larger view from like 1950 to 1930. So you can kind of see it's gradually, steadily going up. And then here, this one's like a little bit blown up on what it's been more recently. So More recently, you've got the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, like when the housing bubble popped, and people were losing a lot of money in the housing market. But it came back, and then pandemic hit again, and went way down. But it's starting to trend back up again. Okay. So we use the amount of goods and services produced from the current year, but we multiply those amounts by the prices of the goods and the services in the base year. So goods produced in 2020, but they use the prices from 2012 in the real GDP. Okay. So the U.S. gross domestic product from 2018 to 2019. So the nominal was the 20.5 billion, whereas the real, when they used the 2012 dollars, it was more like 18. So when you adjust for inflation, it goes from that 20 billion to 18 billion. And same thing the next year. There's like a difference of $2 billion between the nominal, like the dollars that we have today versus, the 2012 one. So when we can compare it year to year. So we have like a base year is what they call it. So the nominal gross domestic product tells us that we produced $846.8 billion more of goods and services in 2019 than 2018, which is not entirely true because the prices of goods and services, they may have changed between 18 and 19, but the real GDP tells us that, in fact, we only produced $434.5 billion more in goods and services, but the goods and services increased in a price on average of 1.74%. So that shows that we weren't really as productive as the real GDP shows, but we were still very productive. It was just like a 1% increase. Okay. How do we observe changes in GDP over time? It's the business cycle. I kind of showed it to you already, what it's looked like over the years. Like it's been trending up, right? So when it's trending up, that's called an expansion. When it goes down, it's a contraction. There's peaks and troughs in that wavy line. And then kind of what I showed you in that previous graph, it showed, you could kind of see how it was just, it was just zooming up, right? Like it's constantly growing. So that is the average GDP growth, is that line over time. Okay. Causes of the business cycle, there's 5 of them. There's external shocks, so like something from outside of the business cycle, from like here in the United States, like something that happened outside of the United States that affects us here, like rising gas prices in the mid-2000s. So that was because, there was like the global war on terror in the early 2000s. So gasoline, oil was hard to come by from Middle Eastern countries. So it made the gas prices here go up. Changes in investment. As the economy expands, people invest more in business, but this expansion eventually has to stop, leading to a recession. Monetary policy and fiscal policy, these are what the government does. So these are like government regulations that can affect the business cycle. So monetary policy, that's like the Federal Reserve. like releasing more money into the economy. So that can make interest rates stay low. So people will invest more in like stocks and bonds, stuff like that. But when interest rates go up, people will stop investing and the economy will stop growing. So when interest rates are low, people are going to borrow money to build houses, fix up their houses, stuff like that. Fiscal policy, spending and taxation, changes impact others' money decisions. And then speculation, so these are like economic guesses. Like, professionals will, guess or speculate what's going to happen to the economy in the future. So, like in the late '90s, early 2000s, there was the dot-com bubble, where like everybody was creating a website, and Yahoo became huge, and everybody was investing in Yahoo, and then that bubble kind of popped. Like they realized that these websites aren't actual like physical things that you can own. They're more intellectual properties, so that bubble kind of burst. And then it causes a recession. So people lose their jobs, the unemployment rate goes up, which is what we're going to talk about here in a couple lessons. But first I wanted to go over a worksheet with you guys. I'm going to pass this out here real quick. I just want to let you guys know I really appreciate your participation. You've been raising your hands. You guys have been great. Thank you. So, has anybody on this side of the room that got it first? Have you had a chance to look at the first couple? Any ideas over there? Okay, so we'll go around the room real quick, and we'll take a stab at it. We'll see if it is going to be in or out of the gross domestic product. Everybody see that okay? Yeah. All right. So if you want to start over there, number one. If you could read it for me, please.
The sale of the hamburger produced and purchased in 2013, but not eaten until 2014.
Yeah, would that be in or out of the gross domestic product? In. Good. I can see where that's very good. I can see where you would think it would be in. But up here in the instructions, we want to know if it's in 2014. Sorry, 2014. So because it was not eaten until 2014, that one would be out. Number two.
The sale of the TV at the Best Buy in Carmel in 2014 that was produced in South Korea. It said out, because it's not the U.S. TV, it's South Korea's.
Very good. That's exactly what it is. And back in the corner there.
The value of the effort and reaction on the board in 2014
in. So this one would be out of the GDP because it is. It's the one. It's like the chores one. What's that one called? Non-market transaction. So it would be a non-market transaction. It's like a chore that your parents ask you to do, but they're not going to pay you for. So that one would be out. Number 4.
The sale of a Honda Accord that was produced by a Japanese company in Greensburg, Indiana in 2014. And I said N.
Very good. That's exactly right. Number 5, back there.
The income I received for teaching economics at Carmel High School in 2014. I said N.
Very good. That's exactly right. Number 6.
The cash income a Carmel High School student receives from mowing his neighbor's yard. I wanna say out, cause it's not necessarily like in GDP.
Good. Very good. Okay, number 7.
The cost of externalities created when a U.S. factory pollutes the air. I would say out.
Very good. That's exactly right. All right.
The bonus check a worker receives on 12/31/2014. I said in.
You're exactly right. Okay.
The value of a house that was built in 2009 and is resold to new owners in Carmel in 2014.
That'd be in or out?
Out. 'Cause it's
Got it.
resold.
Because why?
Because it's resold.
Resold. Yeah, very good.
The real estate commission that the real estate agent receives for the above transaction, in?
Yeah, nailed it. Great job.
The value of a car produced by GM in Detroit in 2013 but not sold until 2014. I put in.
I can see why you would put in that one's actually out, just because it was sold in 2014.
The value of a piece of robotics equipment that was manufactured in the U.S. in 2014 and purchased by a Korean automobile firm in 2014. Is it in?
Yeah, great job. 13.
The value of the steel produced by U.S. Steel in 2014 and sold to GM to produce a car. I said N.
So that one's actually out. So that one would be like the intermediate goods, like we talked about with the box of cereal. And 14, want to take 14?
The value of the hamburger produced by McDonald's in the U.S. in 2014 that sat too long in the warning bin and was thrown out without being purchased out.
Yeah, great job. It is out. And 15.
The value of a 2007 Toyota that was produced in Princeton, Indiana, sold in the U.S. in 2014, I said out.
You're exactly right. Good job. And 16.
The value of cotton produced in Mississippi in 2014 and sold to a shirt manufacturer in 2014. Is it in?
Yeah, so this one would be out. So the cotton would be considered like an intermediate good. So it's not really the final product that's going to be sold in a store.
The value of pharmaceutical products produced by Eli Lilly in Belgium in 2014 and sold in the U.S. in 2014, and I said out.
Oh, very good. And 18, I think we're back over here.
Allowance your parents give you in 2014 for household chores. In.
And very good. So this one would actually be out.
The value of clothing made in China in 2014 and sold in the U.S. also in 2014. I said out because it was produced in China. But
Yeah.
sold in the US.
Great job. Yeah, kind of like my shirt. It's made in Cambodia. It's part of Cambodia's gross domestic product, not the U.S. Great job. And 20. Is it your turn?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
The sales commission added value of was for in 2014 for selling television that was produced and created by Samsung. Is it out or producing?
So this one, the commission. So do you guys have a picture of what commission is? So like if you go to Tom Wood Subaru and you buy a Subaru, and the salesman that you buy that car off of, he gets a commission. So he makes money off of selling you that car. So it's part of his income. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, cool. And on the back side, there's a few more. Number 21.
The welfare check sent to a struggling family in 2014. Is that in?
So this one would be out. So this one is like the government transfers. So the government is transferring funds. They're kind of just moving from one bank account to another bank account. So those ones are not included. 22.
Stocks and bonds purchased by an individual in 2014. I said N.
I can see why you would. This one's actually out, just because nothing's produced. Like there's no like tangible product that you can hold or touch. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. 23.
The state of Indiana builds a new highway in 2014. I wanna say N.
Yeah, you got it. That's part of the government spending. And that one is included in GDP. Very good.
An individual pays a plastic surgeon for a facelift in 2014. I said N.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Great job.
The federal government pays cancer researchers at the National Institute of Health in 2014. Is that one out because it's a government contract?
So it's actually going to be in, because there is something that's produced here. It's research. Research is being produced in this scenario. Okay. Anybody have any questions on those? No? Yes.
Can you explain just the number 16, because I know it's like the intermediate good,
Yeah.
but isn't like the cotton producer selling that to the shirt manufacturer?
So it's not a final good.
So,
So like my shirt's cotton,
right.
and it would be like the intermediary. So eventually, like I can't remember how much I spent on this, $20 or so. So part of that $20, it's going to J. Crew, but J. Crew is also paying like the workers in Cambodia. And I don't know where the cotton came. Let's say it came from India. They're paying for the Indian cotton to be shipped to Cambodia to make this final product that I could purchase in a store. Yes.
So kind of like to clarify that, if it's not, so it's like almost counting it 2 times if you're counting the cotton and the shirt? Is that kind of what that
So-
means? Like you're kind of counting it twice toward the same GDP if you're counting both the cotton and the shirt? Is that kind of what that means? Or?
So in gross domestic product, we're just worried about the final good, like the final good that you can like buy in a store. Does that kind of help? Like you wouldn't go to a store and just like buy cotton, right? Or you
I
wouldn't.
wouldn't know.
I wouldn't either. I don't have a use for it, but I do have a use for a shirt, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the shirt is the final good.
So it's more like what would the average person buy, not like what would companies buy?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, like the consumer spending,
Okay.
like what consumers are gonna like the final products that consumers are gonna buy.
Alright.
Does that kind of help?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So the sale of the final good goes towards the GDP.
Yeah. Yeah. Great job. Yes.
What was one?
Which one? Number 20. That one is in. So that's the commission that the salesman is making off of the television. So I used to work at Best Buy, so I know this. Best Buy doesn't get commissions, but I don't know if you guys remember H.H. Gregg. They shut down a few years ago, but H.H. Gregg, their salesmen that were working inside the store, they would get commission off of TVs and washers and dryers and stuff like that. So some electronic stores that you go to, the salesman that's talking to you on the sales floor, he's going to get some kickback. Part of his income is going to come from that TV that he sells you. And then that income that he has, he can use that to buy other goods, to go out and buy, clothes and food and make his house payment, stuff like that. Does that kind of help? Okay, good. All right, you guys are doing a great job. Any other questions on that one? No? Okay. So, go back to the PowerPoint here. My clicker's going backwards, not forwards. I don't know what I did.
I think it's the end of that first set of
Oh,
slides.
good call. Thank you. So now we are on 4.2. So we're switching over from GDP, and now we're going to talk about inflation, or GDP and inflation. Okay. Right, so traditionally the economy has been measured by looking at the gross domestic product, or GDP. However, even the creator of the gross domestic product admits that it doesn't really reflect the full story. And rising gross domestic product has virtually no relationship with each citizen's well-being. Like, it doesn't really have anything to do with, your mom and dad's or me. And how well we're doing as an individual in the economy. So that was Andrew Yang who said that. He was running for president this year. And so how do we measure the standard of living? So it's the level of wealth, comfort, material goods, and necessities available to certain socioeconomic classes or certain geographic areas. Yet there's generally accepted measures for standard of living, like the average real gross domestic product per capita. So it would be like if we break the gross domestic product down per person in the population of the United States. And that comes from our Federal Reserve Bank. So that's a government statement. So real GDP per capita. So to find the real GDP per capita, we divide a country's real GDP by their population. So the result gives you like an average output or gross domestic product per person. So you take the real GDP, which is that 19 trillion, and then the population of the United States, which is currently 329 million, and we divide those two numbers to get 58,365. So now they're not saying that the average household, that 58,365, that's not like the average household income. So it's just the value of stuff in our economy per person. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. So if we look at other countries like Japan, or Uganda, if you divide those numbers in Japan, you've got the 40,000 versus Uganda, which is in Africa, 633. So quite a difference between Japan and Uganda. Japan is kind of more like we are here in the United States. They're more developed. They have a lot of, imports and exports that they have. And they have a fairly large economy compared to Uganda's. So Uganda, the per person is 633. That's pretty low, right? But if you think about it, they aren't going out to stores and buying clothes, right? They're probably making their own clothes. So like they probably are buying cotton, to make their own clothes with over there. So it's, the cotton might be a final good over there. I'm not sure. But they're making their own food. They're making their own houses. They're farming their own food. They probably have, their own livestock that they have. Each individual has their own little garden and livestock probably that they're getting milk and meat from, stuff like that. All right, supply and demand, microeconomics. Yes.
So I just we were talking about the cotton thing just
Uh-huh.
randomly, and this kind of came to mind. So when you're building something, you know how you can go to Home Depot and buy wood
Yeah.
to go and I don't know, make a birdhouse or something? Would the wood that you buy from there be going into the country's GDP?
So if it's wood and you're gonna use that wood to build a deck on the back of your house,
Yeah.
and since if you buy it at Lowe's, that would be a final good that Lowe's is selling.
Okay.
So yeah, if you're buying it as a consumer,
Mhm.
it would be included in the gross domestic product. Whereas if a custom home builder is buying it, they're probably buying it in bulk, getting a discount, and and they're using it to build a home,
Mhm.
which would be considered a new investment
Yeah.
in the gross domestic product.
Okay. Alright, that makes sense.
Kind of makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, my dad is a home builder, so he, when he's buying wood, he's making stuff for an investment for himself, which is probably a little bit of a gray area.
Mhm.
But yeah, if you're buying it, you're not a custom home builder. So you would be using it to make something for yourself,
Mhm.
not something that you're going to sell.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so supply and demand, you've got the curves where they meet up, that's the equilibrium. So you've got the quantity and the price and a typical supply and demand curve that you learned about in the first few chapters in microeconomics. So the quantity, that's the amount of certain product being supplied or demanded. Price, that's the dollar amount. Demand, that's the total amount of the product people want at every single price. And the supply, that's the total amount of product producers will make at each price. And then equilibrium, that's the price in the middle, where they're equal, where supply equals demand. So the reason we look at that is because we can take that supply curve and compare it to macroeconomics. But in macroeconomics, we look at a few different things as opposed to the microeconomics or the household decisions. This one's the big economic decisions that an entire country would make. So they look at real GDP down here instead of quantity, and instead of price, they look at price level. So the real GDP, that's the dollar amount of goods and services being supplied and demanded. So it's similar to the other one, but a little bit different. Price level, that's an index indicating a weighted average for level of prices within the economy. Aggregate demand, so there's aggregate supply and aggregate demand, where aggregate demand is the dollar amount of goods and services demanded within the economy at every price level. Aggregate supply, it's the dollar amount of all goods and services produced within the economy at each price level. And then the equilibrium point in the middle, once again, that's the price level at which the dollar amount of goods and services demanded within the economy is equal. to the dollar not being supplied. So price level, is the average level of prices within an economy, and often the price indexes or indices to determine the price level. The price level or average prices within the economy fluctuate from year to year. So that leads to inflation and deflation. So inflation, it's like when prices go up over time. Deflation is when prices go down over time. In my lifetime, it's been inflation. Prices have gone up. And it's all prices on all goods, not like single goods, like a can of Coke or a can of Sprite. So you're looking at like all goods within the economy. The prices are going up for all of them. So inflation and deflation, what prices do the indexes that we use measure inflation and deflation? So we use the Consumer Price Index and the GDP deflator. I have a graph here that shows the Consumer Price Index. So I pulled this off of the I think it was the Bureau of Labor Statistics this morning. Kind of hard to see there. Let's see if I can hold it up a little closer to the camera. But this gives you an idea of the entire country, and it's broken down into various geographic parts of the country, like the Southwest, Midwest, Northwest. And it shows you like a graph from the past 20 years of what the Consumer Price Index has looked like. So the gray bars there, those are recessions. So that was like the Great Recession during the housing bubble, and that one was like the dot-com bubble. So when those recessions hit, looks like this CPI, the Consumer Price Index, started going down during those recessions. Okay. And there's the Producer Price Index also, or PPI. I don't think we're going to look at that last one. I think we're just going to look at Consumer Price Index and GDP deflator. So, the Consumer Price Index, it's an index used to understand how prices change over time for goods and services typically purchased by consumers. This list of goods and services is known as a market basket. So you'll calculate the current basket's value, and that is to determine the total cost of the basket using the prices from the current year. Calculate the base year's basket's value to determine the total cost of the basket using the prices from the base year. And you'll solve for the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, using the basket values from the year you want to look at and the base year, and you'll calculate that year's CPI. It was the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they use prices from 1982 as the base year. So that's the year that they're comparing all the other years to. So they compare this year to 1982, they compare last year to 1982, 2010 to 1982. So that's just the base year that they use. And that CPI calculation is the current year divided by the 1982 year times 100 to get a percentage. So the base year is always going to be 100 for the CPI. And the CPI, it's just an index. It's not a percent or a dollar amount. It's just a number. So there's no dollar sign or percent signs to these. It's just kind of a number that gets spit out. So the next year you would take that 43,567, divide it by the base year, and then multiply it by 100 to get this number. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Same thing here, you would take the 46,000 divided by the 21,000, multiplied by 100 to get that number. And same thing here, 47 divided by 21 to get the 218. Kind of makes sense? Clear as mud? All right. Consumer Price Index, calculate the inflation rate. So, to get the inflation rate, once you have found the numbers on the previous screen, the 100, the 198, 218, once you find those, you can use those to solve for the percentage change or the inflation rate between any 2 years. So you take the first year, or the year you want to look at, minus the original year, divided by the original year, times 100, and that'll spit out a percentage. Whereas that first CPI number was just a number. You can also write it as the delta. Delta just means change. Okay, GDP deflator. I also ran that from the Bureau of Labor Statistics this morning. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this one just because it's kind of long. once I show it to you, you'll see what I mean. So yeah, this was the GDP deflator. It spit out all this information to me. But if you're interested, you can go to that website, the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, and you can find all this information. So looks like they do it per quarter every year. Looks like they just released the third quarter just last week, I think, for the third quarter of this year. So it's like took quite a big hit in the second quarter, but we're going up in the personal consumption expenditures in the third quarter. So that's a good thing. Okay. So the GDP deflator, you can solve for the nominal GDP to find the GDP using the current year prices. You'll choose a base year, so whichever year you want to look at, 2020, 2018, 2019. So you'll determine your base year to find the real GDP of that year. Solve for the real GDP, so you'll find the GDP using the base year prices. Calculate the GDP deflator using the formula below to find the GDP deflator. And since nominal GDP is equal to real GDP in the base year, and the base year's GDP deflator is always going to be 100. So there's a difference between CPI and the GDP deflator. CPI only measures price changes in goods and services consumers typically buy, whereas the GDP deflator measures the price change across the entire economy. So to calculate the inflation rate, once you've found the indexes, you can use the indexes to solve for the percentage change or the inflation rate between any 2 years. So the GDP deflator in year one is equal to the earlier of the 2 years. GDP deflator in year two, it's the later of the 2 years. So if you use the formula, the GDP deflator in year two minus the GDP deflator in year one, divided by the GDP deflator in year one, times 100, you'll get that percentage. Or if you also want to think about it as that change. But that change means that you have to do that subtraction. Okay. Types of inflation. there's demand pull inflation, which is kind of like increasing costs. It's also the increased aggregate demand. And then there's cost push inflation, which is the decreased aggregate supply, or like prices going up. So this compares the difference between the two. On the left, you've got the increased aggregate demand. On the right, you've got the cost push inflation, which is the decreased aggregate supply. So you are going to see a shift in the supply and demand curves. For some reason it didn't draw it. So this one, you'd see the aggregate supply go from year 1 to year 2, and it's going to be a left shift on the supply curve, and it would be a line like here. I don't know why it's not drawing it. I apologize. And then over here, the demand pull inflation, since it's an increased aggregate demand, the demand curve, the blue line, is going to have a right shift. So it would be like a line like down through here. Did you guys have that in your notes already? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, just know that one's a demand shift, and the other one's a supply shift. Other things to know, I think there's creeping inflation. So this is normal. Creeping inflation kind of always happens. It's kind of always going up between 1% and 3%. And this is normal in a growing economy. So it's not an issue, but you do see it. There's typically a direct relationship between GDP growth and inflation rate. So as GDP increases, so does inflation. And as GDP decreases, so does inflation, possible deflation. Then there's stagflation, so this is kind of like stagnant, non-growing economy, but you're still seeing prices going up and unemployment. So that happened in the 1970s. Hyperinflation, so that's when the money supply grows too fast, people get more money, demand increases, and the demand pull drives prices up. That looks like the inflation, so that's kind of the one I showed you earlier, that CPI going up and down. All right, and now we're going to go to 4.3, or unemployment. Okay, so the labor force. So this is all people either employed or unemployed over the age of 16 and that did any work at least 1 hour as a paid employee. And the labor force also includes the unemployed, which is people who are 16 years older, who has had no employment and has made efforts to find work. So like you've sent out resumes, gone on job interviews within the past 4 weeks. So those are the people that are included in the labor force. What about someone who isn't looking for a job? They are not in the labor force because they're not employed or unemployed. So who would that include? It's going to include the military. I mean, they are employed, they are earning money, but it's the government's paying them directly. So they would not be included in the unemployment. Economic indicator, people who are under 16 are not included. People who are institutionalized, like people who are incarcerated in prison or mental hospitals, or or just physical health hospitals, they are not included in the unemployment numbers. Students are included by choice. Like you guys probably could work if you wanted to, but you don't have to. You kind of have a choice. homemakers, like housewives, like women who are working in the house. You know, they are working, they're taking care of the home, cleaning, cooking, stuff like that, but they are not included in the unemployment numbers. And the elderly or retired people are not included in unemployment, and discouraged workers. So those are people who looked for a job but quit working because they got discouraged. So they would not be included in the unemployment numbers. So what if there's an overlap? Like if you're going to school, but you also have a job, so you would be included in the labor force at that time. So if you guys are students here in this class, but you do have a job, you are included in the labor force. Unemployment rate. So that's the current percentage of people in the labor force that are unemployed. So the unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the labor force times 100 to make it a percentage. So the number of people unemployed divided by the number of people who are either employed or unemployed or the labor force. September 2020, the labor force was 160 million. So you took the unemployed, the 12 million, plus the employed, the 147 million, and that gives you the amount of people that are in the labor force currently. So yeah, those two added together make up the labor force. Not in the labor force, there's 100 million people not currently in the labor force. And then the civilian non-institutional population, so people who are not institutionalized, is that 260 million out of that 329 million we talked about earlier. So to figure out the unemployment rate, you divide the unemployed by the labor force. So you would divide the 12 by the 160 to get a percentage, 7.86% unemployment in September. So that was fairly high. Usually, the past 10 years, from 2010 to like 2020, it's been like 3.5%, something like that. So it is a little high right now. Yeah, there you go, by year and month. So last year it was like 3s. That's pretty good. Right after the recession, it was pretty high, but then it started getting lower and lower throughout the teens. Types of unemployment, there's frictional, structural, and cyclical. So cyclical is the one that we're worried about. Hello. Frictional and structural are kind of everyday ones that can happen. So frictional is like people who are between jobs, like they quit one job and they're looking for one. Structural, that's like if technology takes the place of. And then cyclical, that is like ones that are caused by recessions. So those are the bad ones. I did have another chart I wanted to show you of unemployment. There it is. So I pulled this one off of the Federal Reserve website. So it's kind of small, but the gray bars that you see, those are recessions. So what happens to the unemployment rate during the recession? Does it go up or down? Yeah, very good, it goes up. So as the unemployment rate goes up, that's how we know we're in a recession. Okay. And we are gonna practice doing some unemployment rate here real quick. Okay, so this one, just gonna work through it real quick. If you guys just want to copy me, I'll show you what we're looking at here. So we are looking at the labor force. And we want to determine who's in the labor force. So would full-time workers be in the labor force? 3, 10. Part-time workers, would they be in the labor force? Yeah. Would be. Discouraged workers, what do we say about discouraged workers? Not. Good job. Don't worry about them. Senior citizens working at Walmart, would we include them? Yeah, we would. Military, we don't include them, right? Homemakers, did we include them? No, we did not. Good job. People out of work but working. Oh, I think that's wrong. That's supposed to say looking. Sorry for the typo. So people out of work but they're looking for a job. Do we include them? Yeah. We include them. Prisoners making license plates? No. Full-time students working part-time? We wouldn't. Do we include them? Yeah, we do. All right, so we are going to add those guys together to get the total labor force. So what do we got there? 37, 41, 47. So 47 is the labor force. And which one are the unemployed? Which one of these numbers was unemployed?
4.
Yeah, 4. So we take 4 over 47 to get our unemployment rate. Does anybody have a calculator on them?
It's
9%?
9%.
Okay. 9%. And that is our unemployment rate. Okay. Anybody have questions on how we figure unemployment rate? No? Yeah, that one's a little easier math. Okay. So, cyclical is equal to the current rate of unemployment minus the natural rate of unemployment. Natural rate of unemployment together to make up the natural rate. So frictional and structural, those are natural. Those are, kind of what we expect are going to happen. Whereas the cyclical one is the one that we're worried about. So the rate that exists within a flourishing economy is approximately 4 to 4.5%. It was pretty low in 2019, right? It was like 3.5, but typically it's like 4 to 5%. And I had another worksheet to go over with you, but I missed it, so we're going to come back around and do it now. This guy. Right, does anybody remember that equation up at the top? Yeah.
C plus I plus G plus X minus P.
Very good. All right, what was the C?
Consumer spending.
Consumer spending, exactly right. And what was the I? Anybody? Yes,
Investment.
investment, you were exactly right. And the G, what was the G? Yes,
Government spending.
you got it. Great job. And the X, what was the X? Yes,
Exports.
exports, you nailed it. Great job. And the M, what was the M? Yes, so are you. Imports, you got it. Okay, now I would also add spending to investments. Can everybody read my writing okay? Yeah, alright, good. So solve for either the CPI or market basket in each of the following years. Okay, so anybody remember what the base year was? Base year for this one, 1982 or 2012? 82, you got it. So that one, the CPI is always 100 for the base year, right? So now that we know that, we can figure the other ones. So does anybody remember that equation? So this one, so this one's the 26, 226 times 1. So this one, we gotta move the decimal place over a couple. So that's where I'm getting this number from. 9, 4, 3 equals 31, 321 is the final answer for that one. And then this one, it's the division, so we take the year that we're looking at divided by the base year. So it's the 42,196 divided by the 26,226. Oh, and we gotta multiply it by 100 to get a. And that one comes out to 160.89. So this one is kind of weird because we're looking at a year before the base year. So we still do the same equation, the 17,284 divided by the base year, the 26,226 times 100. But it's just gonna look weird because it's less than 100, because up to 65.9. And remember those CPI numbers, those are just numbers. They're not percentages, they're not dollar amounts. They're just a number to help us do the next box over here. Okay, does anybody have any questions on that first box to figure out the CPI? Yes?
Can you find the ones in 1988 again?
For 1988, so in order to turn this one into a percentage, we just moved that decimal point. So the decimal point, the 119.43, we moved that decimal point over a couple to make it into a percentage. So that's where that 1.943 came from. And that one, instead of dividing, we multiply to get that 31. So you multiply 26,266 by 1.943% to get that 31,329. Kind of help? Okay. All right, so now that we have that, we can do this next stuff. Is it time to go? Ran out of time? Okay. There's a minute left. So I'm gonna show you how to do this one real quick. So you take the base year minus the year you're looking at. 65.9 equals 34.1. And then you divide that by the base year. I'm sorry, the year that you're looking at. And this one equals 51.7%. Do I have to spray down your guys' desks, right? Okay. I will let Mr. Clayton know that we didn't get all the way through this macroeconomics quiz. And I'm sure he'll go over it with you before the next class. I think there's a test on Friday, is that right? You guys is next week?
Tuesday.
You guys are meeting Tuesday? Okay. So I'll let them know that we didn't quite get through this one. You guys go ahead, I'll clean your desks for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hope you guys have a great day. Thank you for your participation, I appreciate it.